Calculation unsensitive.
Hey everybody, welcome to another installment of Tales from the Forlorn Dopes. I am your host, Cybersmily.
And I am Wisdom000. Greetings, programs. We are so happy to have everybody here with us listening in today.
Yes. Yeah, so our normal beginning rant, I don't think there's too much cyberpunk-ish media going on. Looks like Dark House kind of is no longer doing cyberpunk, but who knows, maybe with the expansion. I also haven't heard any news about the expansion coming, or when it's coming.
Just slight rumblings in the background. There's no word from CDPR about any kind of schedule for release about anything. Not the update, not the DLC. So
yeah.
They just
So I don't know if I talked about this on our chat, but there is a kind of cyberpunkish show on Netflix called Young E. It's a movie from Korea. I want to say maybe. I mean, my age, we're getting old. Also, I had COVID last year, or not last year. I did have COVID last year. I had COVID last week too, so my mind might be going. Not that COVID is the cause, but I'm sure it did not help the state of my mental capacity. But yeah, Youngie is I thought it was a very good cyberpunk story. There was another one I also recently watched, which was with George Clooney. What was it?
Oh, really?
Yeah, Midnight Sky.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I know it's a little older, but basically it's an end of the world. I mean, it's kind of cyberpunk in that there was, a mission. I forget if there was a mission. I think it was a mission to Mars. And they're coming back to a world that kind of no longer exists. And George Clooney is I don't think he's the last human to exist on the planet, but he's definitely one of the last ones in not a safe place. I don't remember exactly what the cause was, but basically Earth's atmosphere was becoming toxic, and George Clooney was up in the Antarctic at a base, and basically living the rest of his days, because I believe he had cancer and was going to die anyway, so he just said, I'll sit here. And then the whole dialogue between him and the ship that's returning and the communications. It's a pretty good movie. I mean, it's a thinker, so which means it's a little slow. But it was
it
like,
sounds like this movie from the 70s. I don't remember the name of it, but it was kind of the same type thing.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of like
waiting to die.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like interesting sci-fi, cyberpunk, near future movies that are very, very slow. Like I thought Gattaca was a good movie, but I know a lot of people thought it was garbage.
I very much enjoyed Gattaca.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't it wasn't action, but it was firmly cyberpunk. I mean, it was basically Harrison Bergeron taken to the next level. So yeah, I enjoyed that.
Yeah. So I thought it was good, but I know some people did not. Yeah. So there's again not too much going on within the media. Now, granted, I haven't really done a full deep dive and normal research into following various links and news articles about Cyberpunk in the general media, but it is what it is. Like I said, I had COVID last week, so I had other things on my mind.
As you do. I watched. I've started watching Alice in Borderlands, which is based on a manga. So far, it's following the manga pretty close. It's not cyberpunk, but it's kind of cyberpunk adjacent.
Are you watching the first season, or now you're watching the second season? Because I watched the first.
First season.
Yeah.
I'm a few episodes into it. It follows the manga pretty well. It is about as dark and bleak as it was. Like I said, I'm not really cyberpunk, but it's kind of theme adjacent.
Right. It is. But you could also. So you haven't watched. So you read the manga, so you know who's behind it all.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, it's this powerful corp. Or am I thinking of something different? No, I'm thinking of Squid Games.
You're thinking of something different. You're thinking of Squid Games.
Yeah.
Which
is kind of the same. I know. That was the one.
If you liked one, you'll probably like the other.
Yeah. That was the kind of thing that I was watching. It was like Squid Games came out after, or I don't know when they officially came out, but from a streaming point of view, it was like Alice in Borderlands, Squid Games. There was, I want to say there was an anime as well that kind of followed that whole thing, but it all boils down to, coming from like Battle Royale, that movie.
Yeah. Which still did it better than anything else, as far as I'm concerned.
That was a messed up movie. So, yeah, so from a media point of view, there's not too much news. From a gaming point of view, we just got
big news.
The biggest news. After at least 10-year wait, we finally get Black Chrome from Eurosource.
It is here. It is out. It is pretty. We're not going to say too much about it to let everybody, get their own copies. So we're not spoiling anything for anybody.
Yeah, we do plan on doing something in the coming future, maybe next month or the following month. It all depends on our schedule, because we have some interviews lined up that we want to get to. We were debating whether or not to talk about it tonight, but I think we said we were going to do Eurosource, and by God damn it, we're going to do Eurosource. Get it
Integrity.
Yeah, get it off our plate so we can move on to bigger and better. Well, I wouldn't say better necessarily. Interesting, different topics like Black Chrome. So I got my digital copy. I started reading it. I haven't dived too much into it, so that's another reason I think we should wait, because I would like to really consume the heck out of it before we start discussing it.
Yeah.
But definitely kudos to Jay Gray and James Hunt for getting this done and out the door. I'm sure it's been a long, arduous journey for them as things changed and various, even the game has changed from when it was originally intended to come out to, because I think Red wasn't necessarily fully fleshed out.
Yeah, it's just nice. Like supplements are coming out, and that's a good thing. Keeps the franchise alive.
Yeah, so I think I don't know if it's the next on the schedule, but I know Rogue's weapon cards, I think, was mentioned as something that was coming out, and of course this was from last year. And then you also have the Edgerunner 2077 expansion.
Yeah, and the storyteller kit.
Storyteller kit. I didn't see that.
Yeah, they were talking about it being developed on Bartel Sorian's blog a few weeks ago.
I need to take a look at that.
Yeah, supposedly it'll give new game masters the tools they need to tell cyberpunk stories.
Cool. Well, of course, my money's going to be spent on that because I've always been a firm supporter of Bartel Sorian and everything they do. Also, I just got an update from the Combat Zone Kickstarter. So,
yeah, they're talking about May, June.
Yeah, well,
Did I read that right?
If all goes well. So what I read was that they are getting all the stuff shipped next month. And then the following month, when they get it, they're going to start doing the fulfillments. So April, May? The end of April at the best earliest time. And I should say that that's probably not going to be feasible. So I think to your point, May, June, July, we should start seeing stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's all, regardless, as long as it actually gets here and it looks like it's gonna, I'm gonna be happy.
And that Kickstarter kicked off 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, maybe.
Jesus, has it been that long?
Yeah.
Good Lord.
It was right before COVID.
It was right before COVID.
Literally right before COVID. And the same goes with Cool Minis Cyberpunk game, which I haven't seen any updates of recent from them.
Yeah, I wasn't able to afford to kickstart that, so I'm just out of the loop on that one completely.
Yeah, I got one maybe a couple weeks ago. Just saying, hey, we're all on track and everything's good, and not too much juiciness. Or at least we're ready to go. I think they gotten all the graphics done. Here's it. When was this? This was sent at the beginning of the month. So maybe we'll be getting another update, but they said they approved all the resins and plastic production, so I assume that means they're moving forward with production.
Well, that's good.
So if that was at the beginning of the month, that means probably May they're going to finish with production, put it in a bunch of containers, ship it overseas, and it'll hit our shores probably July, I'm thinking. I'm thinking July, August. So possibly right at the time of Gen Con. Which reminds me, I'm actually going to go to Gen Con this year.
Yeah, I'm jealous.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I haven't
Gonna
been
meet
there.
the peeps.
Yeah, I haven't been to Gen Con since back when it was in Milwaukee. I think 2001, 2002, I think is when I went. But yeah, me and a bunch of buddies.
I mean, the whole Artalsorian crew is supposed to be there this year, so
I hope so too. Oh, which reminds me that I think our August 2nd show. No, it's the Wednesday. So I don't know if I'm going to be available. I might be in a car or flying.
I mean, if you can't take a week off for Gen Con,
Yeah.
what can you take a week off for?
Well, I'll see what I can do. Yeah, see that's
Maybe.
that's the problem of like taking it on the road is my machine is a hell of a lot more powerful than any of my laptops or tablets I have, so not sure how well a streaming with you would go.
Well, I may send some stuff to you anyway, just to have you get some signatures.
Oh yeah, I should print out some of the combat zone goodies that they gave as STLs for you, so you can add to your collection of miniatures.
They're pretty.
All right, so any other news? There was the DLC, which was helped contributed to Black Chrome that Artalsorian did.
They apparently they had to release a version 1.1 of the PDF for Black Chrome because they I guess they forgot to credit one of the writers.
Yes.
And there was also Black Chrome Plus, which gives individual files of like the maps and some of the images and whatnot. Tokens.
Yeah, and I liked how they did the whole countdown to the release date. Now that
it was
now that they cemented that release date as opposed to, previous years, it's like, yeah, it's coming.
It was a nice change of pace from like the silence to weekly updates on, hey, this is coming, here it's coming, it's getting closer, here's some more pictures. It's all good. It was a very welcome way of handling that.
Yep. Yeah, so kudos to Artalsorian for that, and I think who is it, Dice, who did the videos and to help with that countdown. I thought that was pretty nice.
It was a nice touch. It definitely helped push the excitement level up.
So, are we ready to dive into the main subject of tonight?
I believe we are.
So, I know we said that it's going to be about Eurosource, Eurosource Plus, and possibly Rough Guide to the UK. Don't know if we're going to get to the Rough Guide to the UK. And as for the base Eurosource, I'm going to have to kind of take a step back because it is one of the few source books I do not have.
I mean, most of the stuff in the original Eurosource, it's mostly most of it's just updated in Eurosource Plus. So if you've got Eurosource Plus, Eurosource itself really isn't necessary. Unless you're a completist, there's nothing you're going to find in, unlike say Deep Space and Near Orbit, there's nothing you're going to find in this book that's, or in the original Eurosource, that isn't either reprinted in Eurosource Plus or made obsolete. So
right.
We can just glom over it really quick. Mention some of the highlights.
Different art, I assume.
Different art. Eurosource was a 2013 source book, so it's mostly done in that style of art.
More illustration than
Yeah.
simple illustrations or photographs.
I mean, there's no photographs that I'm aware of.
Well, that was one of the styles, right? You had Solo Fortune and Rocker Boy that had photos that were kind of doctored up.
Yeah, but they were the only two because they were done in the magazine style. With Eurosource, it's they probably could have added some photographs and it would have been just fine. But they just went with illustration and the painted cover, of course. Let me get this. Sorry, my PDF was freezing everything up. I had to close it and reopen it. I really like the cover of Eurosource. It's not typical.
Yep.
In that it just shows a bunch of people like chilling out. But it definitely gives you a glimpse of, what to expect from a Eurosource feel. It's all very clean. It's all very it's modern without like letting go of the past. You see the Eiffel Tower in the background and all that. I like the cover. It's a very competent painting by what's this guy's name? Doug Anderson, who was a favorite of Cyberpunk covers. The book itself is written by Mark Gagliotti. I'm not really sure. I don't know.
Yep. And you can see part of the original cover on Eurosource Plus on the back cover.
Yeah, they reprinted there. The interior artists are, other than Mike Jackson, most of the others are, there's Lawrence Williams, Eric Etheridge, Dan Villalobos, and Mike Jackson. Mike's stuff is pretty easy to pick out of the rest. He's got a very distinctive style. Actually, all the artists in this book have a distinctive style, but his is the only one that I'm all like, well, that's him. Mm-hmm. He worked on so many other books. It's like I said, really, I could go through this book really quickly, but a lot of it is
we can just
updated in Eurosource Plus or just kind of made obsolete by it.
So if you're a completionist, get Eurosource.
Yeah, it's not a very big book. It's not going to be very expensive, hopefully.
I don't know about that. A lot of the old Cyberpunk books, the people who know their value set certain things. And granted, if you can even find it on eBay.
There are some decent adventures in the back. You may want to check those out. I wouldn't say they're necessarily worth the cover price for the rest of the book, but they're good enough. But yeah, let's just move on to Eurosource Plus, because that's going to have all the relevant information for your Cyberpunk 2020 game, and it's presented better. It's honestly, like I said, Eurosource, the original Eurosource, is like a tiny book. It's the size of Rocker Boy or Solo of Fortune, whereas Eurosource Plus it's not quite as big as Home of the Brave, but it's about the same size as Rough Guide to the Pacific Rim.
Right. Yeah, so let's get into Eurosource Plus. So the main writers were Jose Ramos, Florian Flo Marks, and Steve Gill. Illustrations were done by Daryl Elliott. He did all the illustrations? I guess so. Layout was Ben Wright, another big guy from Altor.
We'll be interviewing him next episode.
Yes, we will. Harley Parents Studios did the cover. Back cover, of course, was Doug Anderson. Cover design, Mark Schumer.
Parente. That's I don't know who Horley is, but Parente is Paolo Parente. So.
Yeah. Editors, of course, is Derek, who was, I think, the editor for 80% to 90% of all Altor books at the time.
Indeed.
As well as Janice Sellers, and a bunch of special thanks to, I'm sure, other contributors. The great thing about like these source books, and I don't know if we mentioned it with Pac Rim, was that Altor, or at least Mike Pondsmith, specifically looked for people who were in those countries or in that continent, right? So if you look at Pac Rim, there is a lot of Japanese as well as Chinese, Korean, Asian writers and authors. And here you can actually see there's also European authors when it comes to the source book. So you know you're getting people who are in it and understand where things are going, at least in the country that they're
embedded in the culture, as it were.
Yeah. Right, so first chapter, of course, is Fortress Europe. This is kind of lays the whole how Europe is structured, and any of your characters in your games who says, "Oh yeah, I go to Europe all the time," you need to read this chapter, because if there is some quite a bit of expense to get into Europe, especially if you want to become a citizen.
And traveling around inside Europe is expensive. Like, everything in Europe is expensive.
So basically this chapter goes into how Europe has kind of closed its doors to the rest of the world. And really, if you're thinking of like high level corporate world, sanitized cyberpunk, I think Europe, you're going to find that a lot more than in the Americas or the Asia or any of that.
Well, Asia outside of the major, outside of Japan, basically.
Yeah. So basically this chapter just goes into how restrictive the countries are, and how they prevent it. They not necessarily have a wall to Eastern Europe, but there is definitely a lot more. There's a gate at least, or a fence, that makes sure no undesirables come into the country. And those who do, or those who try, are going to be met with force.
It's a very have not society, where it's in the Americas of 2020. There are obviously many different gradients of people who have something and people who don't. In Europe, it's like country by country. Like, these countries have stuff, these countries don't.
Yep.
That sounded really stupid to say out loud. But if you read the book, it becomes more obvious what I'm talking.
It does. I think if you're from a gaming point of view, I think the best part of this is there is like lists of how much any type of entry into Europe costs. Like to become a citizen, it costs €750,000
Yeah.
to be a permanent citizen. Is it, or wait, $250,000? Sorry. Which no, wait, PRC is simply to buy is $750,000. And then
It is not cheap.
It is not. So if you have any of your players try to pull that crap, which one of my players tried to like, oh, I have a brother who lives in Europe, so I'm going to go to Europe and spend the rest of my days there, fleeing from the situation that happened. I'm like, okay, that's fine. No, I don't care who your brother is. He definitely does not have €750,000 in his bank account. And a
Yeah, you can get a tourist visa that'll let you stay for like a month at the most, and it costs 100 EB per week, which isn't bad necessarily. But given the average pay rates of beginning level Cyberpunk characters,
yeah,
that's a pretty hefty chunk of change.
It is.
Green cards are even more expensive. They can go up to 10 weeks, but they're 200. They're 200 a week, so double the cost of the visa. Yeah, coming to Europe from the outside is not cheap, and doing it the illegal way is really no cheaper. At least not if there's any chance of you getting caught at all. So
hopefully things will start working a little better. Again, apologize. I was foolish enough to read a bit of an article on how to improve performance with OBS doing streams, and well, I took their advice, and the only way I can test whether or not I'm successful with those setting changes is to do it in live. And
yeah,
hopefully this
we need
improved.
to figure out a way to test this stuff out.
Well, there's ways. I could create a Twitch account and test it there and do some hardcore configuring, but that would mean I'm actually, kind of professional. And are we really professionals?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so, because I don't
We
see my
strive to
paycheck.
be at some point, but yeah.
I'll when I start seeing a paycheck, that's when I'll know. Okay, I got to step up my game. But for now, we'll get into it. So we discussed the first chapter and how expensive and how hard it is to get into Europe. The next chapter, who runs Europe? This chapter is pretty lengthy, and it's very political. It gets into the details of how Europe is actually run. I mean, to the point where it gets into all the various commissions, departments, sub-departments. Yeah. So there's a lot to take in. And to a GM, it's kind of too much fluff for my taste.
I disagree. I actually think this is one of the most relevant parts of the book. Because this wasn't really touched on with the original Eurosource, and all over the Cyberpunk line, they talk about, the EDF as becoming this kind of, monolithic group of countries. They'll talk about individual countries, but for the most part, the EDF is this big conglomerate that, works well, and you need something like this to try and make sense of how those groups would actually interact with each other, how you get all these individual countries to coalesce and really work towards one goal, while still maintaining enough autonomy within their own borders. Yeah, I like this chapter a lot. It's a chonky read. Don't get me wrong, and it's not something that you're gonna want to read a bunch of times. But if you're running a European campaign, or even a campaign where the EDF plays its own part, or the EEC for that matter, it's kind of necessary.
I guess so, but like, you know, it's about 16 pages worth of like, and it breaks it down into every single commission. There's actually a org chart of the whole European community government structure, and it goes into, you know, a few paragraphs for each of the various commissions. There is some highlighted text on some of them to give you a little more background and how it kind of would impact your campaign, but I don't know. I think this is just too really, high level, right? For
it really sets into concrete just how ridiculous the bureaucracy is.
I suppose.
And all the various agencies and groups stepping all over each other's toes.
Yeah. Again, I think this is one of the reasons why this isn't one of my favorite source books, is because of a lot of the bloat, I would say. But then again, I work with some Europeans, and they definitely like their hierarchy and structure and dotting every T and I, versus us Americans who like to play loose with the rules, as it were.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, the thing I kind of, and again, I didn't care too much about the armies, but in the exterior commissions, when it breaks down with the various regions, and how the EU kind of interacts with those regions, I think that section is probably more important. And I would like to see that fleshed out a little more. Interpol, sure. I see Interpol being a very useful section. But like, you know, Interior Commission, Finance Commission if you're doing corporate. The Defense Commission, Technology Commission, Population Commission, Communication Commission. Well, granted, Communication Commission is very small. Food Commission, Energy Commission. Now, granted, those are the smaller of the couple of sections, but
yeah, they get like a paragraph or two apiece.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's just to illustrate mostly how ridiculously bureaucratic everything is.
Right.
So much paperwork has to be filed with everything.
Yep.
It is very much the European Union is very much a committee-based everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, comparing this to maybe it's my American biases, right? Versus like Land of the Free, that I didn't care for this, and you know, I should be more cultured and more responsive to the various areas in which Cyberpunk has grown. But yeah, I suppose that, you know, Europe being a bigger major player of the Cyberpunk world should get a bigger and better supplement than Land of the Free.
Well, I mean, Land of the
Home of the
Free is
Prey.
just
Sorry.
America, or
Yeah.
just United States of America. Home of the Brave. It's just United States of America, written by Americans for Americans. So they don't have to go over quite as much information. Whereas, Eurosource, while written by Europeans, it's still written for Americans, and they the things that other Europeans would take for granted kind of have to be spelled out for most Americans.
True. But I mean, even looking at
So-
Home of the Brave, how they got into the various governments. Granted, Home of the Brave concentrated a lot on the military. But it is
Yeah.
America, so it's understandable. The country that spends the most money on their military would have a bigger section for that. But yeah, I think this section with the commissions might have been reduced a little. But who knows, right? I have a bit of a bias in my viewpoints, so maybe I should take a step back and think about that a little more.
Couldn't hurt.
That can't hurt. So the next chapter is the major powers, which starts off with the timeline and the breakdown of the timeline of Europe and how it became the superpower it became, and all the wonderful things it's doing now and influencing in the world. So that's kind of a good read to get the various timelines, because it also helped all the timelines in any of these cyberpunk books, to me, is great for inspiration of subjects that you could delve into.
I absolutely love the timelines in the books. And on Mark Cook's Chrome page, he's got Days of Future Past, the canonical amalgamation of all the timelines and all the various supplements in the time of 2020, of course. But it's one of the most useful resources for world lore that's out there. So Mark Cook, good job.
Yep. Yeah, and also it looks like the stream is a little better. I don't see any buffering too much, but hopefully all of you are still here listening to our gobbledygook and going forward. So after the timeline, we start getting into the breakdown of all the various countries. So first up is France. Interesting take on France. From a person looking in to this subject, it's interesting how, I don't know if who the writer of this particular paragraph was, but they seem to think French is a little snooty, like us Americans do.
I mean, I think most of the world think the French are a little bit snooty.
Yeah. Well, in the overview, it's like the French are very proud. Mouthing off about France is likely to get you a face transplant.
Yeah. There might be a little bit of bias going on with some of these entries. Just a little bit. But it's they're all fairly stereotypical views of, the various European countries and our projections from the 90s towards them in the future. Some are a little bit more inventive than others, but they're all going to be fairly stereotypical future visions. And France is kind of like the prime example of that. It's very, very 90s views of France,
Yep.
which is much better than early 2000s views of France, which in America was just our views of any other country. Pretty embarrassing.
Yes.
But
Well, I think it's weird because technically I can. The various regions in America are pretty much various regions of like Europe, right? You have various different cultures throughout the states, right? So East Coast,
Yeah.
West Coast are different. The South and the North are different, and various regions throughout the states. The only difference between us and Europe is we all speak kind of the same language. The majority.
kind of.
Yeah, kind of. There
Kind
is, like, if you go to Canada, you get some French, and in America, you have a large population of Spanish, but generally, most speak English. And granted, in Europe, I know for a fact that the majority of population speaks English as well, but they prefer their native language.
I was more laughing about how ridiculously varied English is in the United States.
What are you talking about, y'all? Yes. So the next country is actually three countries that were combined into Benelux. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it.
Benelux.
Benelux. Well,
Actually, I think it is Benelux because it's
yeah,
Luxembourg,
yeah,
Belgium, and
Belgium and Netherlands.
yeah.
So I assume it's all the the combination of the two first letters, except for Luxembourg, which
It gets 3 because
Yeah.
it's cool like that. It's got an X in the name, so you got to include it.
Luxembourg is. I forget if is it it's high up there in like the richest nations of the world. It's a
Yeah, there's
small
no
little
shortage of-
nations, but
of wealth.
it's crazy amount of wealth for such a small little country. But then again, who knows how they got their money? So it talks a little bit about that, and it's odd because I don't think they all touch, because I know the Netherlands. Now, granted, my geography is shit because I have an American education. But
I mean, they
No.
touch.
Yeah, I guess they do. Maybe my problem was I thought the Netherlands was on the other side of Denmark.
Oh, yeah.
That's the problem. Again, my geography sucks. Yeah, I thought Netherlands was like north of Germany, but closer to Poland.
Nah.
Or I confused Netherlands with Denmark, which is another possibility because of my American education. Showing through. Now, granted, if I was in Europe, it kind of more important that I know the geography of all around here. I mean, at least I know that, New England is not a state because I'm actually in New England and we're a few states up here. But you go outside of New England and everyone's like, oh yeah, where are you from? Connecticut. Huh? Really? Where's that? New England. Oh, so you're from New England. Like, no, that's not a state.
Well, it doesn't help that most of the United States is only aware of New England as a whole because of the Patriots.
Yeah.
Oh, they named a football team. You couldn't. Your states couldn't get their own team. You gotta lump them all together like that, huh?
Well, you have the Boston Red Sox and our states really, the states in New England do
Yeah,
not
but that's
have
baseball.
a lot of
Nobody
sports.
cares about baseball.
Yeah. Which is weird. But granted, New England is, actually it's probably if combined all of New England, I think it's as big as Texas is. And the only reason for that is because of Maine. Maine is a humongous state that people often don't realize. I mean, on its own, it's not as big as like Texas or California, but it is a big state.
This is one of the differences between Eurosource and Eurosource Plus is Benelux doesn't even get, like, none
mentioned.
of the individual countries that even make up Benelux really get mentioned.
Right.
They're not big enough.
Got it. So, after Benelux comes Germany. Of course, Germany is the powerhouse, mainly because of EBM, who I believe owns the majority of Hamburg.
Yeah.
So, you're in Hamburg. There's a good chance you're an EBM employee. So, again, all these, it's definitely a nice read if you want to base any of your stories or have your Cyberpunk guys or team go to a Euro state. Again,
I think Germany is probably
the most restrictive.
like the pinnacle of like the Euro solo settings. Like if you want to give your campaign that Euro feel, like Germany's where you want to be based out of. It's got the wealth, it's got some disparity, it's got like diversity in terrain, plus it's got the Autobahn, and who doesn't want to drive around on the Autobahn in your super futuristic sports car? I mean, it's the epitome of the Euro solo experience, or the Euro edgerunner experience, I should say, because not everybody's a solo.
And they know how to throw a good Oktoberfest party.
Yeah, they definitely do.
Yeah, so brush up on your Rhymstein and head off into Europe.
It's man, I really like the art for this book.
So the next section, so the previous section was, I assume, the major players of the European Union. Which, when was this book written? Because was the European Union even, I mean, I'm sure it was thought of, but I don't know if it existed.
I know it was before the euro dollar existed.
Yeah, 1995 was when this came out.
Because I remember when they started talking about the euro dollar becoming a thing, I was like, well, shit, we've had that in our game for years.
1993, huh? November 1st.
Yeah, it came out. It's been out for quite a while.
Yeah, so 4 years after the collapse of the wall.
Which probably was an impetus in putting out Eurosource Plus more than anything else, because the actual collapse of the wall changed things so dramatically that they wanted to capitalize it.
Yep.
Expand.
So the next section talks about the South Europe, or they call it the South, but it's basically the Southern Europe, which includes Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, Turkey, and some African nations. I know there's been a lot of people, at least on Reddit, and even in Discord, looking for material about Africa and where is it at least in red. The problem was there was never really a major source book in 2020 around Africa.
Well, not an official one
yeah,
anyway.
not an official one. There is a fan-made supplement that you can always look at. Granted, it's from a little author that you might not have known, and it's kind of hard to find. I think it's somewhere on Datafortress2020, something about African conflicts. I don't know.
Some weird site like
Yeah,
I don't know.
We'll try to get the
probably
author
a jerk.
on our stream one of these days. But yeah, so one of
But yeah, no, official material about Africa is pretty sparse.
Yeah. And you have to find it in books like this, right? Which will have nuggets spread throughout the book, right? So it's you had it in the government structure. They talked a little bit about it. Here they talk a little bit about it as one of the chapters, which is basically only a page. You can also find it in Bartmoss's Guide to the Net. There's actually a little more material there. I think that probably has the most material when it comes to Africa.
Yeah, not Euro. We're talking. Deep Space had some material about Africa there, mostly
Not too
about
much.
the various spaceports. Yeah,
not
too much. Just a little bit.
Yeah, little nuggets. And granted, the High Rider Society or the High Rider community is mostly Afrocentric.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the things that I've been trying to play up in my campaign for the High Riders, because I had a care.
Yeah.
I had one of my players like, because I was talking about one of the tribes is like, he went on to one of the AI art programs and generated a bunch of like pictures like, it would look like that. I'm like, no, those people are too light skinned. It's like, okay, no problem. So, yeah. But yeah, so the Southern Europe, these guys aren't that, kind of like how it is today. The Southern Europe nations are not major players, nor do they have the kind of money that France, Germany have. So it's
no, I mean, Portugal, their entire police force is Arasaka and their military. Other than what they push into the EDF, it's pretty minor.
right.
And Spain's in very similar boats. Like they don't. They're not the main contributors to really much of what's going on, but they're each rich in their own culture and identity.
Oh, they're definitely rich in their culture. I'm just saying, like from a European Union, and I think it's interesting that it kind of mirrors what it is today.
Yeah, they're just kind of there.
Union. They are there, and they're not. They're not as affluent as France and Germany. So,
they also don't seem to have the ambition of France, Germany, and the UK. They don't really feel like they need to go much further beyond their borders.
Exactly. So after that we get into New Central Europe, which covers the countries of Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and the Splinters. I don't know if all those countries exist anymore.
They certainly don't exist as they do today.
Yes.
Again, Poland, this was written in '93.
Very true. Poland still exists.
The countries are still there, but they don't take on the world stage as much, really. Poland, obviously, but
Yeah.
like Bulgaria, I don't remember the last time I heard anything about Bulgaria.
Yeah, so again, a little dated.
I mean, anybody playing Cyberpunk 2020 is going to have to deal with the fact that a lot of the information that was presented back then was from a 1993 point of view. So, yeah, there's a lot of information here that's extreme.
Yeah, because I definitely know that Russia had not broken up by then. But yeah, so if you're looking for Croatia, Serbia, Slovenia.
I mean, it's still also crazy what they did get right. So there's some of that.
And then after Central Europe, you get the margins, which include the UK, which they have a bit of subject, but or a few paragraphs on this. I think this was before the rough guide to the UK, which might have been a response from some of the Brits writers, Cyberpunk players who wanted to.
And a lot of it's kind of contradictory.
Get the facts straight on the UK and how they envision it. Similar to when we were talking about Home of the Brave and how the subject of Connecticut and how deforested it is, and I don't know about that, or how we are. Well, even today, I mean, we just got snow this year, so if global warming is supposed to be in Cyberpunk, then yeah, the people from Connecticut are not going to be deforesting too many of our trees to make warmth. Besides that, we got cold.
Yeah, plus, I mean, deforestation is one thing, but when you describe most of the rural country as just being abandoned, like, yeah, the trees are going to come back.
Yeah.
They may not be the same life-affirming trees we're familiar with, but there will be vegetation. Without anybody to cut it back and without the fires, like, we know radiation doesn't prevent trees from growing.
Yep. The next section, of course, is the Nordic countries. So here you can find out a little bit more of the beautiful lands.
Scandinavian bloc.
That are in the north. And is that part of the same section? Oh, yeah, the marginal. So they also get into Russia. There's some good stuff here, but I think if you really want to get into Russia, I think Solo Fortune 2 has a lot more. No, it was this book did come after the breakup of Russia, because you have the Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova. So yeah,
it's this is one of the sections that are kind of prescient. The Ukraine not really getting along, or the Ukraine and Russia not really getting along is present here. I guess it's really been present forever, but yeah, they talk about Chernobyl. They talk about Moldavia. Yeah, it doesn't get a very large, and really, Eastern Europe, Northern Asia should have gotten its own, like, the Neosov. There should have been a Neosov source book. There really should have, because there's less information about like the actual political and geographic climate of Eastern Europe than there is about Africa, if you can believe that.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I don't think they saw in the 90s, which I'm kind of surprised at, or they just never got an author, was, how South Asia, right? India, Pakistan, and those countries just have very little representation within the world.
Yeah, they were just kind of glommed over,
and they're almost half the population of the world.
Yeah, especially from a modern standpoint, looking over how little information was released about those regions, it's almost a crime.
Even back then, India's population was 1/3 of the world, and I don't know if it's just hard to imagine how big of a population.
Yeah, but if you'd asked me in the 90s how important, like, India would be to the tech sector today,
true,
I would have looked at you like you were crazy.
Yeah.
Back in the 90s, India was still just seen as this kind of backwater, I'm not going to say backwater, but this old world country where just not a lot of modern innovation happens, whereas today, it's what it is. It's where quite a bit of the modern innovation.
Yeah. India is an interesting country, right?
Yeah.
Because it does have some modernness, but it also has
it's hugely influential, and it's a global technological powerhouse at this point. But they still dress very traditionally. They still maintain, like, their caste society and all that.
Among that, there's other there's other aspects of India that are it's an interesting country, right? Because you have that really polarizing influence that you have, these very well, you not only do you have polarizing from rich to rich to poor, and really the craziness that whole aspect is, but you also have that, a lot of the tech
the wealth and poverty divide is
and you have a lot of that tech stuff that's there, but there's also the not tech stuff, right? The analog that country has, and I've worked with many teams from India over the past 15 years of my career, and it's the country has definitely grown, but it's also doesn't grow in a way, right? Because it still has that old philosophies of like you said, the caste system, how and again, the middle class is just becoming is still trying to become a bigger part of India, which is hard, right? Because you have
it's a very rigid caste system.
It's a rigid caste system, and there's also there's a lot of corruption
Well, yeah.
in the top segment of the society, right? And that top segment is not going to allow.
I mean, it's one of the
grow or-
oldest civilizations on the planet,
That too.
and they are so many of those. When you have a situation like that where the civilization is that old and the traditions are that ingrained, it's hard to move past them. Even when they're moving into the future, they still cling to some of the old ways that just aren't gonna do them any favors in a global society in the long run.
Yeah. True.
But I mean, it's like that with any old civilization. It's like that with a lot of the Europeans. Like the old animosities die hard. The prejudices are still there. You've got old wealth that just continues to, vomit power and influence.
Yeah.
Making it.
This book is definitely about power and influence.
Power and influence.
So, and again, this chapter kind of wraps up with Northwest Africa. So, Morocco, Algiers, and Tunisia. Which they combined into 2 pages. Not too much there.
Really? Yeah, it's like a page and a half. And like a good quarter of that is taken up by a blurb of timeline.
Yep. The next chapter, which is Class and Eurostyle, I think is a little more relevant to a game master or a referee on how you want to portray the scene, right? It gets into the various class societies, who are the nobility, the golden childs, right? So there's this segment of the population who kind of are just completely wealthy and have really no care in the world, but being the ultra rich.
Yeah, they're. It's funny because it kind of describes influencers before influencers were ever a thing. Like if influencers were suddenly the ruling class, that's the golden kids. Like new money that doesn't know what they're doing with it and just really wants to party all the time.
That is true. I never thought of it that way. They also talk about the Eurocrats, which are basically the new nobility, which is the government body of the European Union. And they are kind of the subservience of the golden children. And then they get into a bunch of the other prominent groups, like hooligans, sports fan. One group which I thought was very interesting at the time, right? This is back in '93, the androgens.
Androgenes, yeah.
Androgenes, yeah. And
once again, ahead of their time.
Right. And the first appearance of using different pronouns, right? So at that time, I've never heard of that, and this book kind of introduced me to, hey, there's going to be different pronouns for people who, have.
Now, I remember early on that these pronouns actually tried to be a thing, but it just
didn't go anywhere.
Like he and here for instead of his and her.
Yep.
Or he and she.
Or they and them.
Yeah.
Which I know a lot of English majors who understand why people want to try to find a new pronoun, but they also have a hard time with the thee and them. It's like, no, the English that's a plural.
Except it's not, and it hasn't been for centuries.
Yeah.
Like, they and them has been used for singular.
True.
For a long, long time.
Well, moving on, we got the Goths and the Vlads. So, the New Templars, music fans, surprise parties, and stay-ins, who are basically hermits of the new culture. So, we get into the style, which I'm surprised they only put in 3 paragraphs about the style.
Yeah. Seeing as how in every other book, they don't shut up about Euro style.
Yeah.
Getting this little information about it is kind of disappointing.
True. And then the next section is a little less than a page of cyberware and new cyberware, specifically with bioengineering. This is where you can actually raise some stats, like your reflex and body and movement and attractiveness naturally.
Physical stats only.
Yeah. So this is more bioware than actual cyberware. So,
which is the European ethos. I mean, that's
Chrome is ugly.
Yeah. Meat is meat is so very limited, or metal is so very limited. Meat is the way to go in Europe.
Plus, you can get through metal detectors without too much of an issue.
Yeah, and you don't want you don't get a lot of bus drivers going cyber psycho and like eating the kids in Europe. That's just, you got normal psychos for that.
Yeah. It moves on to nationalism, which, again, a little paragraph about it, a little blurb, in that they are very deeply rooted in their culture and their nations. And then the next section gives a little bit of a view of the everyday life of the Europeans, making sure that there is always mentions the security, that you always have to be watching out for Big Brother, and you should always have your ID. Even, I think, in some instances today, you still have kind of a very presence, well, it depends on the country, but you have a definite presence that they are watching. I think more in Germany and Central Europe than kind of like France or Spain, but it is a lot different than America is used to, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Europe were the first people to throw down with like just constant camera surveillance and CCTV everywhere. They were very, like, Europe's very security conscious, which is, again, one of the things that makes Euro solos and American solos so different. Is Euro solos are constantly aware of how scrutinized they are.
And that's why they opt for BioWare versus Cybernetics.
Yeah, BioWare, they don't wear armor. Their weapons are all highly concealable. Whereas, in America, it's a lot easier to get away with, walking around with a gun, or incorporating armor into your clothing to some degree without gaining too much attention. Most of, like, the states' borders in America, even with the free states, the borders are going to be much more lax than they are going from one European country to another. But by that same token, there's not the level of violence in most of these European countries. Some of them are granted true shitholes with tons of violence. I'm not going to name any names of which ones they are in the 2020 universe, because that's one of the joys of reading the book. But like public transportation is a very big part of it, because there's not the danger that there is in most of like the United States. Nor is there the stigma against it. Like everybody takes the train, everybody rides a trolley, everybody gets a cab. Most people like walk places in their hometowns.
Yeah, and it talks a little bit about that with the technology gap, right? That they're still based in the past.
Yeah.
And even mentions that the technology of the European corporations are actually first distributed to other countries before they're actually brought into Europe.
I mean, I think the main defining theme of the technology in the Eurosource books is that they try to integrate the technology with the traditions of the past, and then instead of like just mowing, like leveling everything and building parking lots, they build up on the older structures. And yeah, that's not to say you don't see the ultra modern stuff, but they try to integrate it with whatever else is going on in the region.
Right. So again, this chapter really gets into kind of the life of Europe. It gives a little bit about the education system. Big section on the entertainment that's available. A little bit about the religion, the economy, and unemployment versus employed, who you'd be working for, which also gets into the actual costs of living in Europe, and it's a hell of a lot more expensive than night cities prices. So yeah, so once you start paying to get into Europe, it's actually going to be even more expensive to live there.
Yeah.
Well, but the good thing is they give kibble for free.
Eculus TPK brings up that rapiers and swords were a thing and considered a fashion statement. And yeah, that's actually a part of my game, that in most places in the world, including most of Europe and Asia, and parts of the U.S. for that matter, swords themselves are a fashion statement. You can get away with walking around with a sword. I just thought I'd interject with that. Yeah, like very much so, especially among the upper crust, where the elites of society, they'll be seen carrying around like a family sword, or a sword ordained with house crests and things of that nature.
Yep.
It's been like that since yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of your point about transportation, they do go into transportation within the Union, between
Yeah.
the various countries, as well as how it's controlled. And then the following section, and kind of last section of this chapter, is the law. And I'm surprised that they put the EEC, some of the stuff, as the death penalty, which, well, death or long-term prison. I thought most European countries have gotten rid of the death penalty.
Again, 1993.
True.
And I think, it's not that far of a stretch to look at it from the 1993 situation. Hell, even today, with the amount, when looking at the Cyberpunk 2020 timeline, with the amount of conflict and plague and all these world-shattering events, it's not hard to see that the death penalty would make a comeback in most of Europe, especially given the traditional. I'm not going to say joy that many European countries had towards the death penalty, but it definitely has been a prevalent part of many aspects of their history. Like,
and it was kind of a public affair for quite some time.
Yeah, like it's hard to romanticize French culture, for example, without bringing up the French Revolution and Madame Guillotine and all that.
I think the last guillotine was back in the 60s or 70s.
Like 70s.
Yeah. Which to me baffles my mind that, wait a minute, they're still using the guillotine in the 70s?
Actually, I think they tried to bring it back recently. I don't know if
I
it had
would be
any
surprised.
success, yeah. Yeah, I also get the whole feeling on law in Eurosource Plus really comes across as kind of rushed. But yeah, that's rushed and simplified. It takes up like a page, and leaves plenty of room for GM interpretation, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, and the final chapter is the various roles. So basically, how each role would be portrayed within Europe. I like this section just because of the art. The art is for each of the roles is just great. I really like the rocker boy. There was the cop was a little interesting. But this section, again, just a page for each role in which it gives a description of how that role,
how they operate.
Yep.
Yeah. What makes the European version of different from the American?
And it also gets into 2 additional roles that are from different source books: the runners and spies, which does it list from when gravity falls. So actually took some non-canon supplement and brought it in here. And then and there's also a blurb about the life path and how you would change it. My life path generator on my site actually takes into account these changes. So
awesome.
There is you can select your Eurosource as a source for your generation, so it'll get generated for you.
About the runners and spies, it's weird that it's always been weird to me that there hasn't been something more to cover this, but the original roles in Cyberpunk were fairly, in some ways, they cover everything they need to cover, but in others, they just didn't. And runners are basically smugglers, and that could have been subsumed into the nomad culture better. And with Red, it is. Spies, spies were a different one to incorporate, even though there's a great many campaigns that really just turned into spy campaigns. Just as characters got higher and higher in level and got more difficult jobs, they became, a lot of times it becomes like an international espionage thing as opposed to just go here and blow shit up.
Well, I think with 2020, the base book said, and it gave you an example of like, hey, if these roles don't cover everything, here's how you would create a new one, right?
Exactly.
Come up with 10 skills. One of them is going to be a special ability. The other skills, pick randomly that makes sense. And boom, bada boom, bada bing, you got a new class. And you can flesh out the special ability as needed. Because special abilities were so vague, right? And you didn't have to come up with too many game mechanics around them.
Yeah, which is why you ended up with a lot of really weird home-brewed roles and special abilities that back in the days of GeoCities and whatnot, were popping up everywhere, and some of them I looked at and were like, how the hell would you actually incorporate that? Like special abilities with the most vague, abstract definitions imaginable, which really weren't that too far off of some of the core roles, but yeah.
Exactly. So we got... we're not getting into the rough guide to the UK, I'm afraid.
No, we'll have to
Another
save
20 minutes.
UK for a later episode, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
However, on the last page of Eurosource Plus, we have the first ad for The Ravengers by Stephen Bilius. You've got to mention it. It's there.
It is there. It is part
Bite
of the
Boy
history.
and Bite Girls. Still the worst names I've ever heard for any characters ever.
I've encountered a few. I've created a few.
I mean, they just sound like something from a Saturday morning cartoon. But yeah, I had high hopes, such high hopes when I saw that ad. I wanted the book so badly. I'd be hard pressed to think of a more disappointing afternoon than finally getting that book.
And reading it from cover to cover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once again, do not recommend to anyone.
I would recommend it if you're a completionist.
I mean, I do own both of them. I am a completionist, but man, unless you just really want to migrate, I would not recommend reading. Because nothing in any of them makes it into anywhere else. Like, there's no part of it they are strictly non-canon, non-entities that, outside of each other, never get referenced again.
Well, are they canon or non-canon?
I mean, they're officially Cyberpunk 2020, but yeah, they don't get mentioned anywhere, anytime, anything about them.
Well, the
ever,
characters,
so.
but the book is canon. Just because
I mean,
you have a
events
bunch
don't
of...
get mentioned, they don't get referenced. None of the new corporations that appear in the books get referenced. None of the NPCs or nothing. Like nothing from these books gets referenced outside of the books.
Well, it does go into a little bit about how New York City is, which is kind of, I don't know, a little fantastical.
Yeah, it's completely ignored everywhere else.
It is what it is.
Other than being a completionist, there is no need to buy these books. You're not going to get any backstory on anything. I'm getting off on a rant here, but yeah.
So in conclusion,
The covers were cool.
Eurosource, again, not one of my favorites, but it could well work within your game. Definitely check it out. It has a lot of fluff, a lot of the culture. The BioWare, some GMs would see it as game breaking, similar to how they view Pac Rim and the introduction to martial arts. Just because of
I am not one of those GMs.
Yeah,
I embrace that shit.
I embrace it too. But having the ability to raise your reflex to 12, without any hardwired cybernetics, some GMs would frown on. But overall, I think it's definitely a book to have if you are running European games. And
yeah, if you like fluff, if you like the lore of the world, it's a good book to have. If you're coming from a 2077 or even a red aspect, there's probably not as much that's going to be of interest to you, simply because like red has not expanded enough to cover, outside of the United States all that much yet. But as a 2020 fan, if you're ever gonna have European characters or have Europe be a part of your game in any way, it's a good book.
Yep.
I like it. I like lore. I like fluff. So as much of that as you can throw at me, the happier I'll be.
Yep. All right. So I guess that ends this session. So next time we have Benjamin Wright, aka Adam Smasher, who will be joining us.
We're going to ride on that for a while. Thanks, Ross, because we had no idea.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll get more details on some of the old characters and the iconic characters. Get some more fluff on the background. But Benjamin Wright, he's worked on quite a few books. I believe at least a dozen of the 2020 books, either as a layout designer, contributor.
I mean, he's one of the most prolific contributors to the Cyberpunk 2020
editor
and Cyber Generation. I mean, just
he is definitely one of my top writers for the group, because he basically has two of my top three books, which is he was an author of Wildside, and he also was a contributor to Listen Up, You Primitive Screwheads, which to me are
agreed on both.
The top three books to get, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Good night, Duba Lipa.
Say what?
Duba Lipa said, "Great stream, guys. Good night."
Oh, Duba Lipa.
So I assume
good night to you, Duba.
Taking off. And
to everyone else, I am Wisdom000. I run Datafortress2020 and have since 1996. Which you might find something there that you'll like for your game.
Like an African source book.
Like an African source book. I can be found on Facebook at both the Datafortress2020 group and the Cyberpunk 2020 group. I can be found lurking around on Reddit, or you can get a hold of me just through my regular email. You can also occasionally catch me on Discord. That's more a Will's thing. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, so I'm Cybersmily, aka Will. I am not on Facebook, nor am I on Twitter. Sorry, but I find those social medias a bit of garbage. Anyways, you definitely lurk on Reddit, so you can see some of my comments there. Kind of love the discussions that are happening there. I'm on quite a few of the Discord servers, so if you do an @Cybersmily, good chance you're probably pinging me. I also have my own Discord in support of my site, which is cybersmily.net. where I have a bunch of utilities for both Cyberpunk 2020 and Cyberpunk Red. Mine is not more fluff and content that Datafortress2020 is, but hopefully most of my utilities I try to do the function while Wisdom does the content. So you can check me out there.
You make the best toys, that's for sure. And tools.
I try. So you can also check us out here every first and third Wednesday of the month, where we stream live on Cyber Nation's Uncensored's Twitch channel. Thank you, Rob, for hosting us yet again. Check out cybernationuncensored.com. He also has a Patreon to help support the channel. So if you're on YouTube or I forget what podcast service that Cyber Nation uses, but
Cyber Nation Uncensored.
Yeah, so if you're listening to us from there, like, subscribe, blah blah blah, help support Cyber Nation Uncensored going forward, and I guess that's about it. So I guess we're out of here.
All right, guys. See you in 2 weeks. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye.
Cyber Nation Uncensored.